Looking at a clear start to much of the weekend across the country. The main problem spots confined to Nova Scotia, the Maritimes, major weather system moving through that area. And you can see this little wound up feature. This is a clipper moving through Minnesota and Wisconsin. Some snow showers moving southeast with that system. And also a powerful weather system moving through Europe. Low pressure out there in eastern England. The front located about like that. Warm front and an occlusion running about like that. The main axis of the strongest winds pretty much between the deep occluded low and the triple point. So in between these two areas, we've had high winds come through a corridor somewhat like that. At this time, strongest winds are in the Netherlands and northern Germany. And there's a plot of the winds over the past 18 hours. 71 knots out there near Plymouth, western Wales. That was about 10 Z's, so we're talking about 8 hours ago. Around 12 Z, the highest winds were here, and they've gradually moved out into the Netherlands. And we're seeing 62 knots at Amsterdam at this hour. The WXCharts.com website, a great place to look at those gusts. Let's run that back. There's how things look this morning. So we've got this corridor of 60s wind gusts out there in the English Channel. These tight areas of strong pressure gradient, those are known in Europe as sting jets. It's not really a term we use here in the U.S. However, we can often see those regions developing well in advance of the winds, and they're kind of cyclical. Let me show you an example. Let's move that forward. Look up there in Scotland. Right off the coast there, that's a developing sting jet. And you'll see that traverse down the backside. There it is approaching the Netherlands. You can see the winds increasing. And far northwest Germany, strongly affected. And you can see another one developing up there in the eastern North Sea. And predictably, Bremen, Hamburg, being affected by those strong winds. And gradually the system moves inland and weakens. So those are some things you can look for. These plots of pressure and wind gusts, very useful for keeping tabs on the situation. So you can switch over to the Aviation Weather Center charts to cross-check that. And indeed, that area right here, strong winds already showing up, 61 gusting to 76 right now. That's a little stronger than what the models indicate. So we could see some very high winds approaching the coast in the next few hours, northwest Germany and far northeastern Netherlands. So let's bring it back to the U.S. The weather dominated by this clipper in Minnesota. Looks like about 1002, 1003 millibars in the center, and a very strong temperature contrast. 50s in Nebraska, warm downslope coming in from Colorado, contrasting with single digits and even a few sub-zeros up there in Manitoba. This is a transitional air mass out ahead of it, 30s and 40s in Texas and Arkansas, and much the same out in the Great Basin region. 1032 millibar high across Idaho, suggestive of weather dominated by strong nocturnal cooling on this high terrain. And the true tropical air located out here in Florida, 83 this afternoon, and dew points in the 70s. Let's head quickly out into the Pacific. We're seeing high pressure this afternoon, and then going up to Alaska. Continued stormy with a persistent storm track across the Aleutians into northern British Columbia. Still quite a bit of Arctic air up to the north. We're looking at minus 20s, minus 30s up there around the North Slope, the Brooks Range, and more of it up there in Chukotka in Siberia. And there's a quick look at that. Out in Canada, still continued cold, minus 30s, and even a minus 40 on Banks Island. Some of that sweeping into the Northwest Territories behind this weak system in Hudson Bay. Fairly quiet out there in the Atlantic. This is probably an old occlusion. I did not take the time to draw that, but a very strong system out there in Newfoundland. Look at that blustery 30-knot winds sustained with gusts to 44 in northern Newfoundland, heavy snow. And you contrast that with these relatively high dew points, 45, out around St. John's, Gander. That's air originating from the Gulf Stream, very potent contributor to weather in that part of Canada this time of year. So you get that strong isentropic lift and overrunning, and this could be construed as its own frontal system, almost certainly. And there's some of the news there in the Maritimes. Thousands without power. We hardly ever hear of anything out in that part of the continent, but yeah, it is a major weather system. 661 outages in Nova Scotia, and I'm sure there's outages across Newfoundland. And you can see some of those maximum reported wind gusts in kilometers per hour. So that's going to be 60s and 70s across Nova Scotia. Let's take a look at the upper levels. This is the Q vectors in the mid-level of the atmosphere. The U.S. located right here, Canada up to the north, the Pacific, and the Atlantic. So what do we see here? This couplet indicating a strong quasi-geostrophic disturbance. That's going to be the wave supporting that clipper at the surface, and a couple of other areas I want you to focus on. This vortex off of Northern California, and also this series of waves flattening out the long wave ridge. And when you have that flattening going on, you can expect these to deepen as they reemerge on the east side of the ridge, and that's what's going to happen. All right, so let's run this forward. So we see some strong progression of that Great Lakes system. I've advanced the map up to tomorrow morning. That's where we're at. So some deepening out there in the eastern U.S. The California low has deepened a little bit. There's a couple waves descending down the backside of that long wave ridge. Let's go up even further into the weekend. Let's see, what's that going to be? Sunday? Yeah, it looks like Sunday morning there. Let's go all the way to Monday. Okay, so it looks like that vortex off California has been picked up by the flow and opened up. This one here is deepening. That's what was rounding the ridge out there on the west coast, so that's going to have some major impacts next week. And you can see how that long wave ridge on the west side has de-amplified. Those waves in the western part of the country, quite impressive. This is interesting, out there in the Pacific. So yeah, that vortex trying to break down the ridge. Meanwhile, this one is amplifying. So California getting another shot there of precipitation. But the problem is, it's hard to get those atmospheric rivers going when you have this northwesterly flow. These tend to be a little bit drier than what we would expect. So we'll just have to see as the date gets closer. But as this emerges out of the Great Plains around 25th, 26th, southwesterly flow, there could be the Gulf open. This could be a situation where we could get some severe weather in the southern plains and the southeastern U.S. and even the Midwest. Temperature records. How many of you enjoy this segment? I'm kind of curious. There are some interesting indications coming up for later next week. Let's start out with a short term. Warm day in the eastern U.S. Maine coming up to 51 there. That appears to be breaking the record for the date. No record territory for tomorrow. Nothing for Sunday either. For Monday, the heat returning once again to Texas and Oklahoma with 81 degrees at Lawton. And on Tuesday, we're starting to see some changes here. Well, warm in the southeastern U.S. However, minus teens. Casper and Rapid City indicating Arctic air is on the move, and possibly deep enough to cross the Rockies with 28 degrees at Portland. And there's Wednesday. No question we're getting back into an active weather pattern. -5 at Denver, -22 at Casper, and also very cold out there in the Northwest. And there's Thursday. Wednesday and Thursday, 5-6 days from now, those are going to be heavily biased towards climatology, so we may actually see more cold weather than is indicated at this time. Next week could certainly be interesting. A quick check around the country before we head into the forecast. A very nice day in California and Arizona. And checking in on Big Rig Steve's channel, he is eastbound out of Barstow on Interstate 15, heading for Vegas and ultimately to Denver. And out to his east, little patch of cirrus up at about 25,000 feet. Don't really see much of that on the satellite imagery. That's it. And he's right around here looking to the east. But on infrared imagery, it does definitely show up better. Very cold cloud tops, and that shows up quite well against the relatively warm desert terrain. Quite nice in the Great Basin area. You can see some hint of northerly flow. That's cirrus moving across Boise. And much the same in Washington. I did forget to point out the fog in the Willamette Valley, and some of it out there around the Puget Sound area and Olympia. Coming across the mountains into Montana, we get into that cold polar air mass. Got that front running about like that. Cold air, some snow showers across eastern Montana, and then a transitional Great Basin air mass further to the south. There we are on the backside of the Clipper. Extensive stratocumulus and cold cumulus clouds across much of Minnesota and North Dakota, some snow showers within that, and some slightly heavier precip further to the south. Going down into Nebraska, much warmer. Remember, we had 50s there. Cold front approaching that area, triple point in northern Iowa, and then the occlusion further to the north. And across the Central Plains, we can see the snow track. Can also make out the cities. There's Wichita right there, looking a little bit darker due to the extensive tree cover and maybe a little bit of urban heat island. In Kansas City, even more prominent. Texas, not much going on there at all. Getting on the backside of that cold surface ridge. Down in the Gulf, there's that weather system that moved through Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi yesterday, produced some severe weather. Cold front, warm front, and the tropical air across Florida. There's the storm reports for yesterday. It appears mostly wind. A couple of clusters there of small tornadoes. Around Tuscaloosa, Birmingham, not seeing any major damage. So I think we kind of dodged a bullet there. There's the Carolinas, the main front offshore. There appears to be a thermal boundary kind of lagging. We've got 50s across South Carolina and 40s and 30s up to the north. So this is kind of acting like a secondary front. Heading up into the Midwest region, that is quite a snow track. Snow on the ground from Missouri all the way to Detroit, Fort Wayne, and Chicago. You can really see those river patterns creating little trails in that snow cover. Cold air advection this afternoon in the northeastern U.S. Just enough orographics, moisture, and lift to get some snow showers going in West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and maybe even a little bit of lake effect snows, although we are getting kind of late in the season for that. Okay, let's start out with our forecast, see what's going to happen. There's our clipper. Not much development out in the Great Lakes. One problem is it doesn't have much of a moisture source. You don't see that low-level jet feeding into the Great Lakes. In fact, there's mostly downslope, and that tends to be dry. So that will limit the development of that low. High pressure in its wake, and here comes a good chunk of cold Canadian air. Not really a clipper developing with that one. This is going to be mostly lee side troughing in Colorado. So we will get that downslope in Texas. You saw that 81-degree reading at Lawton for Monday. And the cold air continues to advance southward. This is getting into Tuesday and Wednesday, and we do know that this is going to be associated with some very cold air, some of it filtering into the valleys of Washington, Portland. There could be some canyon winds back in there. You can see that pressure gradient developing right in through that region there. And there could be some more of that around Albuquerque. Many of you are probably familiar with the canyon winds they get there as well, east of the city. And out to the east, there could be some thunderstorms. Let me run that back a little bit. You can see it starting to hook up with some deep Gulf moisture Monday night into Tuesday. So we're going to see an MCS come together, marching eastward on Tuesday and into the Atlantic region by Wednesday morning. And that cold air filtering south, outside chance of some mixed phase precip around DFW. And we're going to look at this in more detail next week. But that could certainly be some interesting weather. There's some cold air damming being indicated right there. That's all cold air. Get that overrunning. And the early models like the NGM and LFM, they used to have a whole lot of trouble with that, and that's what led to the development of the ADA model. Now, the ADA model is out of the picture. That's been replaced with the NEM, the RUC, and so on. And fortunately, they do handle this kind of situation much better. So it will be a cold one next week. And it looks like we're finally going to be getting fiber internet here. That's been a problem. That's a reason that we have not been doing any live streams. Because when the internet gets slow, that can really mess up a live stream. So there's a good chance by this spring we could be bringing back the live Forecast Lab program. So we'll keep our fingers crossed on that. And for Monday next week and the following week, I'm temporarily going to make Forecast Lab public. We do need to periodically work on our public outreach, so for the next 2 weeks, everything will be available. And then after that, we'll go back to the usual Monday supporter-only stream. So I appreciate your patience as we do that, and hopefully we can grow the channel a little bit as we go into March. Hope you all have a great weekend. Take care, and we'll see you back here in a couple days. Bye-bye.